Good evening and thanks for joining us tonight. A fourth finalist for the Minot Police Chief position recently withdrew from consideration amid concerns over the investigation into former Chief John Klug and a current mayoral candidate's involvement. In a letter obtained by KMOT, candidate Richard Rosell said in part, "I do not think the job would be a good fit for me, particularly if he were to win." His malcontents in the agency who provided him with the information that started the ball rolling would now have a direct channel to the top, something which I would not tolerate. Now, Rosell did not name the he candidate that he's referring to, but Councilmember Rob Fuller, who is running for mayor, was named in the Klug report. We did reach out to Fuller, who said the investigation was not about politics or vendettas, but rather based on serious concerns about the department. He added, in part, Minot deserves leadership that's unafraid of transparency and committed to integrity, not someone who sees those things as threats to their command structure. We'll move forward with candidates who are ready to lead with both strength and openness. Now, we have Fuller's complete statement along with the full copy of Rosell's letter in this story on our website. The three finalists, Michael Fry, Edward Orgon Jr., and Dale Plessis, will be interviewing for the job next Wednesday and also have the chance to meet with members of the public that evening at City Hall.